Hello, hello, hello. I'm going to discuss this article that I already discussed before, but I'm going to comment how America took out the Nord Stream pipeline. This is by renowned journalist Symour Hersh, but to give a different perspective than just mine, I'm going to comment on this video system update by Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald is a attorney, human rights activist, and journalist who was one of the journalists that Edward Snowden approached to go with his Snowden files leak that exposed a lot of the criminal acts of the United States government, how the United States government, how we had national security officials lying to Congress, claiming that they weren't spying on American citizens and weren't collecting information that they were, and all these other things. But and then Glenn Greenwald was forced out of the journal of the news organization that he founded, and he was being paid, some people say $500,000 a year to be working at, because he's raised questions about the narrative that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation. This is the laptop that the FBI had in 2019, and they had examined it, and they refused to do anything with it. And then they spread out the lies that the laptop was Russian disinformation. And we have today now Hunter Biden threatening to sue people for reporting on the contents of the laptop and telling them to reserve evidence related to the laptop that Hunter Biden claimed wasn't his. And even now his lawyers say, well, we're not saying the laptop was his. We're just saying that the information appears to be his. And we're saying that maybe it wasn't from the laptop he was stolen. His lawyers said this after the person who ran the repair shop filed suit against Hunter Biden for defamation for claiming that the laptop was stolen and this and that and the other thing. So this is Glenn Greenwald, and he's going to give his explanation of Symour Hersh and his background. I like Glenn. I've never met him personally. He lives in Brazil now, where his spouse is a member of the Brazilian government.
The investigative reporter Symour Hersh is beyond any reasonable dispute one of the 2 or 3 most accomplished, important, and courageous journalists of his generation. Very, very few journalists on the planet, and virtually none who still work inside the nation's largest media corporations, can even get close to him when it comes to having broken more major history-changing stories. Perhaps one of the few is Julian Assange, who is not working within a major media outlet, but instead is languishing in a high-security prison in Belmarsh in London. Hersh is an old-school reporter in the best sense of the word. When he began his career as a journalist, the internet did not exist, nor, except in the most negligible ways, did independent media. And yet, he somehow managed to always straddle the line between independence and working inside the nation's largest outlets. He began by working simultaneously in the 1950s as a copy boy and police reporter for a local Chicago paper and a clerk at the Walgreens drugstore, illustrating that was when journalism was still a working-class profession. He then spent several years as a reporter at Associated Press in the early 60s until he quit in protest when his editors tried to water down one of his stories. He then went to Vietnam and covered the war as a freelance reporter. In 1969, he heard about an Army lieutenant, William Calley, who had been secretly court-martialed for his role in a massacre of Vietnamese civilians. And after investigating it, all as a freelance reporter, he broke the news of what became globally known as the My Lai massacre, in which he wrote, quote, "The Army says Lieutenant Calley deliberately murdered at least 109 Vietnamese civilians during a search and destroy mission in March 1968 in a Viet Cong stronghold known as Pinkville." Hersh's story was picked up by 33 newspapers through the wire service. He was working as a freelance reporter when he revealed it. That incident took place in March 1968, and it involved the deliberate killing by Company C, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry of South Vietnamese civilians. The U.S. Army originally denied all of his claims, insisting that they were all made up and were all fiction. But they ultimately end up admitting most of his revelations, including the fact that Lieutenant Calley was convicted of murder of 22 civilians.
I just want to point out the investigating officer for the Army who investigated this was at the time Major Colin Powell, who then went on to become the famous Secretary of State who stood in front of Congress and in front of the UN saying that the Russia, that Iraq was producing anthrax.
And was sentenced to life in prison, though he was pardoned in 1974. For that reporting, which prompted not some mean tweets, but threats of all kinds of violence from many serious left sectors, Hersh won the 1970 Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. After that My Lai scoop, which helped change how Americans thought about the war in Vietnam, he was hired as a staff reporter by The New Yorker, where he worked for the next 22 years, from 1971 until 1993, and he continued to publish many stories with The New Yorker up until 2017. During his career, Hersh, in addition to that Pulitzer, won the George Polk Award for investigative reporting, the second most prestigious award in journalism, a total of 5 times. The fifth being when he exposed many of the worst abuses at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq in 2004, which resulted in the discipline and court-martialing of numerous U.S. service members. He covered Watergate, the secret bombing campaign in Cambodia, and in 2003, he won a National Magazine Award for his reporting on how Dick Cheney and neocons in the Bush administration were manipulating intelligence and manufacturing all sorts of propaganda and then disseminating it.
Sorry about that.
Largest media outlets. Hersh was always an unconventional reporter, an oddball, someone who never really fit into the glamorous and chic DC salons in which more polished insiders like.
I do not know why this is stuttering so bad. It's very bizarre. The only thing I can think is that I need to reload this a minute. Let me see. I'm at 1450. So we'll just go out. We'll do this. And hit that. Okay. New browser. New window.
Subverting official state propaganda, then peddling it. And for that reason, he has long been hated in Washington circles because he was known for his refusal to play ball, an attribute which decades ago was the hallmark for being a good journalist, but which, in the era of corporatized media, will be career-ending the first chance they get to get rid of you. Hersh is being spoken of again this week because he has a blockbuster news story that purports to describe in painstaking detail what many people, I would suggest most rational people, already believe, namely that it was not Russia which blew up its own Nord Stream pipeline, a project long vital to Moscow, as it allows the Russians to sell large amounts of cheap natural gas to Western Europe through Germany and gives the Kremlin significant leverage over European nations, making it very bizarre to think that they would blow up their own pipeline. But instead, says Hersh, it was the U.S. security state that destroyed it. In an article this week on Substack, under the headline, quote, "How America Took Out the Nord Stream Pipeline," the New York Times called it a mystery, but the United States, he says, executed a covert sea operation that was kept secret until now. Hersh describes that, quote, "Last June, the Navy divers, operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise known as Ball Tops 22, Ball Tops, planted the remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning." Now, when Hersh sought comment about that story from both the Biden White House and the CIA, both of them denied that story with unusual, I would say, suspicious vehemence. From Hersh's story, quote, "Asked for comment, Adrienne Watson, a White House spokesperson, said in an email, quote, 'This is false and complete fiction.' Tammy Thorpe, a spokesperson for the CIA, similarly wrote, quote, 'This claim is completely and utterly false.'" Now, what makes all of this so remarkably interesting is that this is what Symour Hersh has done his entire career. He has cultivated relationships deep inside the CIA and in the intelligence community of essentially dissident intelligence operatives, people who object to and dissent from the prevailing orthodoxy of the CIA, who believe the CIA is constantly lying to the public and often use Hersh to get the truth out. And so while he does rely on anonymous sources and did rely on at least one anonymous source for this story, perhaps more, but I think there's a suggestion that it's only one, even though I'm not comfortable with anonymity, that is what anonymity is for, not for the way the mainstream media uses.
And there's another video I have somewhere. Let me see. This out of the way.
Bob Woodward and the new glittering network news stars that anchor the news so comfortably thrived and found celebrity and great riches. He was combative and disheveled and, most importantly, far more interested in undermining and subverting official state propaganda than peddling it. And for that reason, he has long been hated in Washington circles because he was known for his refusal to play ball, an attribute which decades ago was the hallmark for being a good journalist, but which, in the era of corporatized media, will be career-ending the first chance they get to get rid of you. Hersh is being spoken of again this week because he has a blockbuster news story that purports to describe in painstaking detail what many people, I would suggest most rational people, already believe, namely that it was not Russia which blew up its own Nord Stream pipeline, a project long vital to Moscow, as it allows the Russians to sell large amounts of cheap natural gas to Western Europe through Germany and gives the Kremlin significant leverage over European nations, making it very bizarre to think that they would blow up their own pipeline. But instead, says Hersh, it was the
this is once again, it's the wrong freaking one. Oh, I screwed up. Okay, where was I? Oh, sometimes I get confused. All right, let me do this again. This browser is, Firefox sometimes doesn't work very well.
The way the mainstream media uses it, which is to give cover to operatives inside the government to tell the media what the government wants the media to tell the public. That's propaganda. No one needs anonymity for that, even though that's how it's often given. Anonymity is to protect employees inside the government who tell reporters things the government wants concealed, not that they want disseminated. And that's what Symour Hersh has always done. Most of his stories, including the ones that are so widely awarded and praised, have been built on the back of that tactic and his relationships that nobody denies he has deep in the bowels of most of these buildings in Washington. Now, one of the things that's remarkable about Symour Hersh's story is not so much what he said, but where he said it. Note that he published it on Substack. And that's because Symour Hersh has essentially been expelled from mainstream media circles after this incredibly illustrious career, breaking more major stories than almost every employee of major media corporations combined. His last mainstream story in a mainstream outlet was a 2017 article in The New Yorker alleging that the U.S. government was wrong in claiming that Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian leader, used chemical weapons on his own people. He questioned that claim just the way that, for example, Congressman Thomas Massie recently did in an interview we showed you back in 2017 when CNN was interviewing Massie about why he opposed U.S. intervention in Syria, why he opposed U.S. regime change efforts in Syria. And Congressman Massie said, on top of saying, look, regime change doesn't work, he also doubted, to the great rage of the CNN anchor, the claim that Assad used chemical weapons on his own people. Massie's argument was the U.S. government has said, we will intervene in Syria and change your government under only one circumstance, if you use chemical weapons. Why, said Congressman Massie, would it make sense for Assad to then go and do exactly that which the U.S. government has said would be the one thing he had to do necessary for the U.S. to get involved in that regime change war, namely use chemical weapons? To Thomas Massie and many other people, it never made sense. And Symour Hersh, using his sources, has said that the intelligence about Assad using chemical weapons was extremely sketchy and dubious. And that was ultimately what got Hersh expelled from mainstream media circles, the fact that he dissented on the prevailing story about Syria and Assad that was being used by the CIA to force pressure Obama and then pressure Trump to allow them to go and take out Assad, to do the kind of regime change operation they previously done in Iraq and Libya and so many other places. And for that heresy, doubting the CIA story, that was the final straw that finally let them get rid of Symour Hersh. And just to explain and illustrate to you how expelled he is, let's just take a look at an article that was published in something called The Business Insider. It was by a reporter, I believe her name is Rita Yankovic, the same last name as Nina Yankovic, who was supposed to be the Homeland Security Disinformation Czar. I believe her name is Mia Jankovic. The reason I don't know Mia Jankovic is because she's never broken a single story of any significance or note of any kind. And yet here she is writing this article in The Insider under this headline, quote, the claim by a discredited journalist. She's talking there about Symour Hersh, the most awarded and illustrious journalist of his generation, certainly one of the 2 or 3 most, to this group, this batch of new digital employees or whatever they are. His name isn't even mentioned. He's the discredited journalist that claimed, he didn't report, he claimed that the U.S. secretly blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And their argument about this story is that, quote, it's proving to be a gift to Putin. Now, who is Business Insider or Mia or Ria or whatever her name is, Yankovic, to talk about Sy Hersh in this way, that, oh, he's discredited? Who discredited Sy Hersh? How did he get to be discredited when not a single person at the site has ever broken a single story of note, let alone a series of major stories? And yet they sit in judgment and talk about him like he's some sort of unmentionable. On top of which, this whole framing is childish and pitiful. It's proving...
And I just want to point out, we have this, I have this, this video here. I'm just going to interject here one because it provides me legal cover for fair use. This is the video proof that the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. This is using the spyglass system. Well, Symour Hersh argues that it was a Norwegian P-8 that the U.S. gave to Norway. Spyglass listed as a U.S. military plane, but the plane is not trackable, so saying it's a U.S. military plane is inaccurate. But this is Spyglass, which allows people to watch different planes. And this box here is the area of interest. The center of it is Bonholm Island.
Oh, I think I was on mute there. All right, so we're going to go through this again. I apologize. I think I muted myself after coming out of the Biden video. But, all right, so the box here, as I repeat myself, is basically the focal box, okay? This is coming in. The aircraft that's coming into the picture here is actually going to be an NA. It's a Poseidon P-8 Navy subhunter, but the NA means it's masked. That means that they cannot, that we can't track it per se. And the call sign is just a bunch of the little asterisks all the way across, okay? Which is interesting. Now, the reason I point this out is because if you go look for this P-8 that I just showed you here in the data, this is actually the one this is the same aircraft leaving the area, and you look up the hex code that's associated with this, which is going to be this AE. Let's see, I think it's like a 5861 or something like that. I can't make it out from my screen, but I'm pretty confident that's the number. Nonetheless, if you go look up the hex code, it is not in the database. So there is a high probability that this aircraft has what they call rolling hex codes, where they can actually change identity, change itself. So it's very hard to trace and track. I tried to add it to my watch list, but because the hex code is not showing in the system, it's not in the database, you can't track it, okay? So let's watch it.
So this is why saying it's U.S. military may be misleading. There's no evidence that this is a new U.S. military or Norwegian military aircraft. We can't really tell. We know it's produced by the U.S., that it's primarily operated by the U.S. Navy, but other NATO nations like Norway, which has a strong incentive to destroy the Nord Stream pipeline because they competed with the gas from Norway. So Norway didn't ever like the Nord Stream pipeline.
Come in. Now note, when it comes in from the left to right, it's actually coming across. It's going to go into an air refueling cycle. And then from there, it's going to bounce out across into that region right over the Nord Stream stuff, okay? So here we go. The aircraft comes in. This is about 1.5 minutes long, folks, okay? So I'm going to talk to it as it's coming inbound. You can see it start to deviate. Right now, it's almost directly over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. But it comes on across. Notice this KC-135 comes in, and it goes into the air refueling together, right? That marshalling pattern. So now they're flying around. They're doing an air refuel hookup. This guy's getting some juice as he just keeps buzzing around for a minute. They're at an altitude of about 25,000 feet, okay? And then as it goes in, so they're at 24,600, I think, something like that. Right now, the time is you're getting up to about 4:30 a.m. I think it is, or coming into about 4:30 a.m. as it starts to enter over the Nord Stream area. Okay, so now they've got fuel, and you can see his directional heading is about to start changing, and he's going to bug out, and he's going to hook a right, and they separate. And so the air refueler starts to bug back to its home base, and then this thing comes in over the Nord Stream and starts to descend in altitude down to about 10,800 feet, and there it is doing a little loop, and then it starts to do some little jiggy line stuff. Okay, altitude is starting to change again. Now let's get down into the weeds of this. And you can see this is around 4:30 a.m. as it's actually 7 a.m. as it's bugging out. But in the window of around 2:30 to 4:30 a.m. on the day of the detonation, remember they woke up and they said overnight somebody.
I think it dropped the buoy when it got to about 10,800 feet. But that's my opinion. That seems to be supported. Monkey Works has done a whole hour video on the flight patterns and everything. You can watch his video. I haven't watched it yet because it came out last night. This was an earlier version by Todd Sella, which I should subscribe to. And I'll give him a thumbs up. And I forgot to give him a thumbs up. All right. Anyways.
A gift to Putin? What does that mean? Who cares if it's beneficial or not to Putin? The only question that a real journalist asks, as opposed to an activist or a propagandist, is the story true? And if it's true, you publish it without regard to who it helps or who it hurts. This obsession with which kind of reporting helps which person, or, oh, you've reported something and it's a gift to Trump or a gift to Putin. This is not something a real journalist thinks or cares about. Who is being hurt or helped by your story? The only thing that you care about as a journalist is it true?
And this is why Glenn, who used to work at major newspaper publications, The Guardian in the UK and other ones, is now on his own again. Because even the journalist, even the news organization that he founded with the help of some billionaire, he was forced out of because he wasn't pushing the narratives that the owner wanted. I mean, not the owner, but the person with the money wanted to push. And this is what, people say the media, they got upset because Elon Musk took over Twitter, not realizing billionaires in the West are pushing the narratives that we see in the narratives that benefit the U.S. Deep state, the CIA, and the FBI. They basically determine what the news is in the United States.
And they're angry and upset that this story is beneficial to Putin. Yes, perhaps the revelations in My Lai about the My Lai massacre were beneficial to the Viet Cong. Perhaps his reporting on the fraudulent process of manipulating intelligence by George Bush, Dick Cheney, the neocons was beneficial to Saddam Hussein. Perhaps his revelations about the abuses in Abu Ghraib prison were beneficial to Al-Qaeda. Who cares if it's beneficial to Putin or not? That's the only way these people can think, though, because that's a mindset of a propagandist. Oh, look, he, as a journalist, has undermined the United States foreign policy and this is what the CIA wants you to know, and that's helping Putin. That's all they can think about. This is actually how they think. It's very revealing. The article says, quote, "The once celebrated journalist, Symour Hersh, made unproven claims the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipe." What do you mean unproven? He talked to sources, he then went and reported it, which is what every major media outlet does every day. Russia pounced on his claims, swiftly endorsing it, despite there being no current evidence of its truth. Symour Hersh's reporting is evidence of its truth. He interviewed sources inside the government. No one ever has suggested that he made up sources before. And all the time journalists treat reporting of this kind as evidence. I'm not saying it's conclusive. I'm not saying you can't question it. But all they care about here is that Russia is promoting it. Of course Russia is promoting it. Russia is saying, no, idiots, we didn't blow up our own pipeline. And here finally, as a reporter, one of the most decorated and respected and prestigious in the last half of the 20th century, saying that that's true. He went on, this article goes on. In recent decades, Hersh has come under criticism by those who call it poorly sourced, conspiratorial, and over-reliant on anonymous sources. The open source investigative outlet Bellingcat was deeply critical of his reporting on chemical attacks in Syria. Oh no, not Bellingcat. Bellingcat, which receives all kinds of funding from the National Endowment for Democracy, which was created by the CIA and the State Department to interfere in other countries and destabilize governments like Syria, and still gets most of its funding from the U.S. Congress and subject to its oversight. It's essentially a U.S. government-funded outlet. It also gets funding from the EU. Oh, of course Bellingcat doesn't like Symour Hersh because Symour Hersh's reporting undermines the narrative of the U.S. security state in Western media outlets. And Vox, the collection of giants of journalism, raised doubts about his infamous 2015 claim that President Barack Obama did not, in fact, mastermind the killing of Osama bin Laden. Many of the claims of the U.S. government in the aftermath of the killing of Osama bin Laden were lies. Many of them. All those claims about how bin Laden picked up his wives and used them as shields, that it was bin Laden and his crew that started shooting. Most of those claims ended up changing, and most of them were lies. But you cannot, in journalism, express skepticism about the claims of the U.S. government, the U.S. security state, or this is what happens to you. They'll just start calling you discredited, that you're a conspiracy theorist. Now, if it were the case that people were expelled from journalism for conspiracy theories or for circulating unproven claims, then I could at least accept what they're doing to Sy Hersh and have done to Sy Hersh on the grounds of a consistency. But that's not the case. It's not prohibited in American corporate journalism to spread false stories and conspiracy theorists. In fact, that's the only way that you can thrive in journalism. The people who have lied the most, who have spread the most conspiracy theories, are the ones who have been promoted and enriched most within corporate journalism. The difference is, the way that you have to advance in journalism is you have to tell lies and spread conspiracy theories on behalf of the CIA, and that advance the interests of the U.S. government. That is not only permitted, that's required to be promoted. What you can't do, the thing that Hersh did that got him expelled from journalism, is he spread what are called conspiracy theories that are against the narrative of the U.S. security state, that undermine U.S. foreign policy, and that's the only thing that's prohibited. That's what gets you kicked out of journalism. As long as the conspiracy theories you're affirming and the false stories you're publishing are aligned with what the CIA says and what the Pentagon says and what the entire rest of the corporate media says, you're fine. In fact, you're better than fine. You're going to have all kinds of rewards lavished upon you. Let's remember that the journalist who did the most to convince Americans of the vital lie that Saddam Hussein had an alliance with al-Qaeda and therefore led 70% of Americans to believe the lie that Saddam Hussein participated in the planning of the 9/11 attacks was named Jeffrey Goldberg. He did that in 2 separate articles, one in 2002 and one in 2003 in the August Journal of the New Yorker, that even won journalism awards. He was put on NPR and every Sunday show to spread this lie. Here you see it, March 2002. The Great Terror was the name of this article from the New Yorker. In northern Iraq, there is new evidence of Saddam Hussein's genocidal war on the Kurds and of his possible ties to al-Qaeda. And then here you have another story in early 2003, right as the U.S. was getting ready to invade Iraq, that was called The Unknown. The CIA and the Pentagon take another look at al-Qaeda in Iraq. So Jeffrey Goldberg did more to spread the false conspiracy theory that led to the Iraq War. He also became ground zero for every Russiagate fraud. And of course, Jeffrey Goldberg is not expelled from the mainstream media. He's not writing at Substack. He is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. He was rewarded with that position as a result of the lying he did on behalf of the U.S. security state. That's the key difference.
And I want to point out The Atlantic, this is I believe, let me see, I have this somewhere. I keep losing things in my, gotta open this in a new tab. Open a new tab. I've learned my lesson. Okay. Well, we got The Atlantic. This is The Atlantic. The Atlantic spreading their things. The FBI is filled with a bunch of rabid. This is Douglas Ernst. The FBI is filled with rabid ideologues who grew up idolizing Colbert and now get paid to cite Salon, The Atlantic, and the Southern Poverty Law Center reports that demonize Americans with functioning moral compass. Douglas Ernst says it's game over. Cue the disintegrating Pac-Man sound effect. I say defund the FBI. But this is The Atlantic, which Goldberg is the editor-in-chief at. He published a story that laid the rosary an extremist symbol, and the FBI cited this evidence in their report targeting on conservative Catholics. So if you have the rosary, it's considered an extremist symbol by the FBI as a result of Jeffrey Goldberg's stewardship at The Atlantic. Jeffrey Goldberg, who spread all these other propaganda lies from the deep state and the CIA.
Not journalists who spread conspiracy theories and journalists who don't. It's journalists who spread conspiracy theories that the CIA wants them to spread. Those get promoted. And then there's the journalists who question the conspiracy theories of the CIA. Those get destroyed. Another person who proves that is Natasha Bertrand, who began in 2016 writing Russiagate hoaxes, spreading Russiagate hoaxes while she was at that site, Business Insider. That now has the audacity to talk about Symour Hersh as a discredited journalist, Business Insider, Mia Yankovich, calling Symour Hersh the discredited journalist as though they have any kind of accomplishments of any kind to point to. That's where Natasha Bertrand was in 2016. Ever since, she's been rapidly promoted. First, she went to MSNBC. Then she got hired by The Atlantic, where Jeffrey Goldberg, as we know, is the editor-in-chief. Then she got promoted to Politico, and now she's at CNN. A very rapid ascent. And the reason she got so promoted so quickly was because she became the most brazen conspiracy theorist and liar, but on behalf of the CIA. For example, here in October 2020, right before the 2020 election, when the CIA wanted to spread the lie that the Biden laptop was Russian disinformation to discredit the reporting about Joe Biden, who did they choose first to give it to? The person I would have chosen if I were them, Natasha Bertrand. She was then at Politico. She was the first out of the gate with that bullshit story. Quote, Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinformation. Dozens of former intel officials say more than 50 former.
And I want to say Glenn is rightly salty on this story because this is why he lost his $500,000 a year position as editor-in-chief of some frickin' news organization that he founded because of his pushback on this specific bullshit.
Intelligence officials signed a letter casting doubt on the provenance of a New York Post story on the former vice president's son. All of that was a lie, as we now know. And she got quickly promoted from Politico to CNN, where she now works. That's a prerequisite to getting hired at CNN, is doing these kind of lies on behalf of the intelligence agencies. Here's just another example. Back when she was still at Business Insider, this is one of the things that led her to get hired by MSNBC and then The Atlantic. Quote, the FBI is reportedly examining why a Russian bank with ties to Putin wanted to reach the Trump organization during the campaign. She was one of the leaders in promoting that false story that even the FBI very quickly concluded was a lie, that Trump had some secret internet server that allowed them to communicate in secret with the Alpha Bank in Russia. She repeated the story over and over for years and then got promoted everywhere. So I don't want to hear from anybody that the reason Symour Hersh is expelled from mainstream media is because he spread conspiracy theories and false stories. Nobody has done that more than the people who run the mainstream media and who are the ones who expelled him. And here you see the evidence over and over. Now, what is really bizarre about the controversy around Symour Hersh's reporting is, from the beginning, the idea that they tried to peddle that it was Russia that blew up its own pipeline was bizarre and made no sense. Why would Russia blow up its own pipeline? From the beginning of the war, we were hearing that that's what allowed Putin so much leverage over Germany and Western Europe to punish them if they got too involved in the war, was that he could cut the Nord Stream pipeline off and deprive Western Europe of gas and heat as it was entering the winter, or cause them to endure extremely high prices. Why would he ruin his own leverage by blowing up his own pipeline? It was such a complete joke. And yet, this is what the U.S. media circulated, the U.S. media that now talks about Symour Hersh. First of all, let's look at the video of Ned Price, who's the State Department spokesman. He was finally asked about Symour Hersh's reporting. It's been largely ignored in the mainstream media. They just ignored that story, like they ignored the 4-part investigative series from Jeff Gerth, the Pulitzer Prize winner from the New York Times, who published in the Columbia Journalism Review a 4-part indictment of the U.S. media, and they're relying on Russiagate. They just pretended it didn't exist. There's such a closed information system, that's what they do. They did the same thing to Symour Hersh's story, but here's one reporter who went to the State Department and asked Ned Price about it and watched him just deny the story.
Do you think the U.S. government's denial of involvement is credible?
I absolutely do, and I repeat it here.
So let me follow up on that, if I might. Have you or anybody else at the State Department any communication with German, Norwegian ambassadors or other allies or officials on this matter?
On the matter of Nord Stream 2?
On the matter of the latest allegations, which give a fairly, I mean, it's an anonymous source. It
would not be. It would not be typical for us to engage allies and partners on something that is utter and complete nonsense and that should be rejected out of hand by anyone who is looking at it through an objective lens.
I mean, remember, the U.S. government also denied the Mile High Massacre when Symour Hersh first reported that. They denied that they were manipulating the intelligence when he reported that. They deny everything that's truthful that you report about them. They denied their responsibility for all kinds of coups in which it turned out they played a major role. So if you want to be somebody who just listens to that denial from Ned Price and the CIA, be like, well, obviously they wouldn't be denying it if it weren't true. Just take a look at history to see how unconvincing that ought to be. But it's particularly unconvincing because in reality, the U.S. government, before the Hersh story, has all but admitted first their intention to blow up the pipeline, and then once it was destroyed, they boasted about the fact that they were so happy it was done. Here is Victoria Nuland, who, as we've gone over before, always ends up running Ukraine, no matter who you vote for. The one time she was out of government was when Trump was president, which is why these neocons hated Trump. No matter who you vote for, no matter who Ukraine votes for, this is the president of Ukraine right here, Victoria Nuland. She runs Ukraine. No,
he does.
Ukrainians can vote for whoever they want. You can vote for whoever you want. This is going to be who's in charge of Ukraine, except apparently if you vote for Donald Trump, and then she'll be out of the government. That seems to be the only way to extract her from the government. Here she was in January, late January 2022, as there was a rising perception Russia would invade Ukraine. Here was the threat she issued.
With regard to Nord Stream 2, we continue to have very strong and clear conversations with our German allies, and I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
And she had a little smile, behind it, because the Biden regime started planning the destruction, according to Symour Hersh, and it seems to make sense, of the Nord Stream pipeline in 2021. Now, the initial plan was that they'd be detonated on a timer that might be like 1 week after the Baltic Ops 22 ended. But it didn't provide enough plausible deniability for the U.S. government. So sometime in May, they changed the parameters of the mission for the Navy divers from being a time delay to being a time delay, plus it has to be triggered by some kind of remote signal. So they have to have a signal and then a time delay. This is why, and maybe the time delay was much shorter. It may not. They may have removed the time delay component completely because it seems like the plane flew down to 10,800 feet on at 4:30, and the pipelines were blowing up about then. So very quickly. So
not hiding what she's saying. She has that smirk on. She gets that like chest open up, like this sensation of strength. She's like, you know what I'm saying. One way or another, there will be no Nord Stream 2 if Russia invades Ukraine. Another person who did that is her nominal boss, Joe Biden, but in fact, there's somebody who's there as the figurehead. They had him read this script too. Listen to him do that. This was around exactly the same time she did it.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will. I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
And he had a little smile on his face. Joe Biden did. Not only that, there was some other thought that I had about this, but I'll let Glenn continue.
I mean, they're just stating openly what they intend to do if Russia invades Ukraine. Now,
okay, and this is why. All right, the stating openly what they intend to do. It was the justification why they didn't. This no longer became a covert op that had to be reported to the intelligence community. The intelligence oversight in Congress, the so-called Gang of Eight, that's composed of members of the House of Representatives, the Intelligence Committee, and the Senate Intelligence Committee. Because it went from being a covert op to a military operations that's classified at code word secret. So it became this allowed the Biden regime to not have to report it as a covert operation. They didn't use special forces at all. That's why they used Navy divers from the Navy diving and salvage team, which there's a good movie about Navy divers called For Honor. I'm Symour Hersh. A lot of people aren't aware of it. It's a good movie. Cuba Gooding Jr., Robert De Niro. It's one of the few movies that highlight the Navy divers.
now, here from a Senate hearing just a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, the president of Ukraine, Victoria Nuland, went back to the Senate, and she was being questioned by a very friendly Ted Cruz. The U.S. senators of both parties revere Victoria Nuland. Remember when she came out and talked about the biolabs or the research labs, the bio-research labs that were so dangerous she didn't want it to fall into Russian hands, she was being coaxed by her good friend Marco Rubio, who was trying to get her to say, this is all a conspiracy theory, and instead she admitted they were there. And now she's talking to her good friend Ted Cruz, who also supports the war in Ukraine. And here she is practically boasting, they're celebrating about the fact that Nord Stream 2 was destroyed.
Senator Cruz, like you, I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
So they're celebrating it. So I'm not saying that Sy Hersh's reporting is accurate. I read the article. I see how he relied on anonymous sources, and I think that always leads to some skepticism. But the idea that it's somehow some crazy conspiracy theory that should be dismissed, given both his history of journalistic accomplishments and the fact that clearly the most likely explanation is the U.S. or its allies did it, makes me certainly very open to that possibility. But because they've talked about, they now talk about Sy Hersh and they've convinced so many people to ignore him. And it's amazing how they can deperson people so easily. And they have all these apparatchiks inside these media outlets who do it for them. This Mia Yankovich, who says they discredited a reporter. I mean, who is she and these people to call him discredited? But they do the work for the government, and so people are trained not to listen to Sy Hersh. You no longer have to pay attention to what he reports. You don't even have to acknowledge it in public. Just ignore it the way they ignored the Columbia Journalism Review article. Now, again, the respectable media, the people who are not discredited, the people who we're supposed to trust and respect and take seriously everything they say, spread this claim that Russia blew up its own pipeline almost uncritically. Here from the Washington Post, September 27, 2022, the headline, Nord Stream gas pipeline explosion prompts investigation into, quote, sabotage, but not by the U.S. Quote, European leaders said Tuesday they believe dual explosions that damaged pipelines built to carry Russian natural gas to Europe were deliberate, and some officials blamed the Kremlin, suggesting the blasts were intended as a threat to the continent. They blew up their own pipeline to make Europe scared that they would next blow up the Eiffel Tower, I guess is how the theory goes. Quote, five European officials with direct knowledge of security discussions said that there was a widespread assumption that Russia was behind the incident. This is the Washington Post just airing this. Talk about, remember the language they used in Business Insider? There's no evidence for it. They offer no evidence. There's no evidence for any of this. But they still put it on their front page. Only Russia had the motivation, the submersible equipment and the capacity, the capability, several of them said, though they cautioned that they did not have direct evidence of Russia's involvement. There's no evidence, they're even admitting that, just like there was no evidence that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, but the media runs with it anyway.
The pipeline was destroyed in an area that was controlled by NATO forces. I mean, NATO did the operations before it had ball tops. The Navy salvage and diving teams were planting mock explosives in that area, allegedly, and having other people find it. So it provided perfect cover, according to Symour Hersh's reporting and other things. That's all discounted.
It serves as a security state. Only Russia has the capability to dive down and blow up that pipeline. Does anyone believe that? Russia has those capabilities and the U.S. government doesn't? Quote, no one on the European side of the ocean is thinking this is anything other than a Russia sabotage, said a senior European environmental official, speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal thinking about the leak. That's why I don't take criticism of Symour Hersh seriously. He uses anonymity. That's all this was. He publishes what his sources tell him with that evidence. That's all this is. And yet the Washington Post doesn't get excluded from being in good standing in the media because they're serving the interests of the U.S. government. That's the determining factor. Here from the New York Times, which was at least slightly more skeptical, but they nonetheless happily spread this all over the place. From September 28, 2022, the headline was Sabotaged Pipeline and a Mystery. A mystery. Ooh, we all love mysteries. Who did it? Was it Russia? An attack on gas lines under the Baltic Sea exposes the vulnerability of an already jittery Europe. Some officials suggested Moscow was to blame, but with little evidence, others urged caution. It was talking about how Poland and Ukraine openly blamed Russia, even though Russia pointed a finger at the United States, and somehow this is all of equal credibility in the eyes of the New York Times. Now, why is it that the Washington Post over and over can spread disinformation and the New York Times can spread disinformation using all the same tactics that Symour Hersh used for his story, which is very common in Washington, to speak to intelligence sources in the US or in Europe, give them anonymity and report what they tell you to say. But it's okay for the New York Times and the Washington Post to do it. Jeffrey Goldberg got promoted for doing it. Natasha Bertrand did too, even though their stories were proven false. But Sy Hersh is over here and he's the discredited reporter that you don't even need to acknowledge. Do you see the reality of how corporate media functions, what their real allegiance is? The Business Insider headline, I spent time on it because it reveals so much about how they think. The only thing that matters to them is not what's true or false, but who it serves. And Sy Hersh's crime, as Business Insider said, was that what he reported was beneficial to the Russian government. And that's the no-no. That's the crime. As long as you're lying and benefiting the US government and the CIA, that's when you thrive. That is the true way that corporate media works. And the fact that there are so many of these peons and minions working inside these corporate media outlets who don't have an iota of courage, would never challenge any government claims or the consensus of the neoliberal order. Never. They just repeat what they're told to say. The fact that they can look at Symour Hersh and speak of him that way shows the ethos of how they know how you succeed. It's that you serve the interests of the U.S. government, you repeat what everyone else in your circle is saying, and you never challenge it. Now, let's bring Michael Tracy on, the independent journalist, because I want to talk to him.
All right, so and then he goes on to talk more about the story, but I just wanted to give you Glenn Greenwald's thing. Now, another video that came to light recently, I got this from the Armed Forces of Ukraine boast about the use of chemical weapons in Soledar. In the video, they are assembling quadcopters by tapping projectile cans of hydrocyanic acid to them. Hydrocyanic acid, a weapon of mass destruction, first used during World War I. And here we go. This is a video from the Ukrainians, that the Ukrainians themselves filmed. So they put these canisters on them, and then they can remotely deploy these canisters to basically gas Russian troops. They have all these canisters stored in the fridge because you have to keep it at a low temperature. Twitter is actually
Оце все полетить на ваші хворі бошки, підари.
So, and Twitter actually put a warning on this for me. So, this is another video that was released recently. This is once again the Ukrainian military taking it. They put a nice soundtrack to it, showing that their drones targeting these soldiers. You get these soldiers, and this one, there's a canister that gets dropped. It goes up there, and then these people almost immediately start flopping and dying. The soldier it starts flopping and dying. I could show you other things going on in Ukraine. They say it's phosgene gas and not cyanide. But in any case, there was another video. It showed an Ukrainian soldier. A Russian soldier surrendered. He was on the ground. His face was on the ground, and he was shot in the back of the head by a Ukrainian soldier, because there's a lot of hatred that goes on, and there's not any consequences for Ukrainian soldiers committing war crimes, because if they commit war crimes, you just blame it on the Russians. So, I like this one. Oh, sorry about that. So now that I did that, I did have another one. There was I have a, where do I have this? I have so many things. Listen, tab. Oh, this is disappointing. There we go. So, let's see. Why does it say new tab here? That's disappointing. I thought I'm very disappointed. Anyways, Russia. In Russia today, in Russia recently, this article was from February 8th, so about the time that Symour Hersh's article came out. A member of the Russian government, Yevgeny Popov, and he's a host of the Russian version of 60 Minutes, put a lot of video segments from Russian television on the screen, including a lengthy statement by Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, former commander of all U.S. forces in Europe from 2014 to 2017. Now, the Ukrainians must be given long-range precision missiles for them to attack Russian Crimea and further into the Russian heartland. This is a game changer for Russia. This means that the Russian now feels justified in completely destroying every Russian military unit. Every Ukrainian military unit. The interview from which this declaration was made does not yet appear in Google search, but from interviews posted in 2022, is clear that Hodges is no madman, and his statements must, as Popov said, be taken with utmost seriousness. The context occurs, of course, is for the radical escalation now being discussed in the United States, is the expectation of a massive Russian offensive to begin shortly as the anniversary of the special military operation approaches. The imminent defeat of Ukrainian forces has focused minds in Washington. One of the regular panelists on 60 Minutes then faced the cameras directly and said that Russia's nuclear doctrine is under revision in light of these plans being aired from the United States. Russia has said in the past, up until now, that it would only use nuclear weapons in the face of an existential threat to Russia. So Russia is now headed towards a policy of preventive nuclear preventive tactical strikes, similar to what the U.S. has. Moreover, if the Ukraine targets Crimea and heartland Russia, then Russia will respond according to plans now being laid down. These plans foresee counter strikes against U.S. military installations in Europe and the continental United States using hypersonic missiles. The panelist calls for this threat of counter strikes in Europe and U.S. to be public and explicit so that no one can doubt what to expect from the Kremlin. And the reason why is the U.S. military is providing direct assistance. It has military advisors. We had that AWOL, allegedly AWOL Navy SEAL that was killed was found killed by the Russian forces. He was embedded with the Ukrainian troops. But the U.S. military said, no, he was AWOL. That's we don't really have active duty. He was active duty, but they said, no, he was AWOL, so he doesn't count. But he was on active duty. He just got up his stuff one day and decided, screw being a Navy SEAL that he worked so hard to become. What he really wants to do, he wants to go AWOL from the United States military and go fight in a foreign war which should be a major crime. But instead, I'm sure his family's going to get paid out and everything because he wasn't tried or declared a deserter. So his serviceman group life insurance will still pay out, and his and all that, I assume, since he was AWOL, but he wasn't charged. So, anyways, the Russians are stripping away the friction of a proxy war and revealing the co-belligerent status of the U.S. and its NATO allies in preparation for a kinetic war with NATO. And then I have more things. We got from RT. Putin says Russia did not start the fight. We'll finish it. This is what I'm going to block this. Anyways, according to Russia, Ukraine began the war in 2014 by targeting civilians in Donbass. The Russian president said this is the coup that Victoria Nuland orchestrated, and she was caught on an unsecured line saying, "What about the EU?" And she said, "F the EU." She didn't use. She used the whole word. And they argued, well, it was a deep fake or something or whatever. But in any case, Putin says here they started the war. For 8 years that war continued, a war to exterminate the people who live there, who feel themselves related by blood to Russia and Russian culture. How long were we supposed to tolerate that? And that was one of Russia's reasons. They also there's claims that Russian children were being kidnapped. That other actions were being taken, kidnapped and used for different things, sex trafficking and other things. And as a result, after Symour Hersh's article, there was a series of, I believe I have it here, missile strikes were reported across Ukraine. U.S. Ukrainian. This one, once again, this is RT, Russian supported media outlet that's been banned in many countries because we have to hate all things Russian. Ignore China. Ukrainian officials and media reported a series of Russian drone and missile attacks targeting the country's critical infrastructure on Friday. Several barrages reportedly caused power outages and disrupted train services. The attacks are said to have started early in the morning, and air raid warnings have since been activated all over the country. The Ukrainian Air Force Command claimed it intercepted 5 kamikaze drones and 5 sea-launched Caliber missiles. Valery Zaluzny, the commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, claimed that 2 Caliber missiles fired from the vaccine had crossed the airspace of Romania and Moldova. Now, Romania is a member of NATO, I believe. So, but it may not be. Moldova's defense ministry reported detected a missile flying over its territory towards Ukraine, condemning the violation, but not immediately blame Russia. Now, Moldova is not part of the EU, if I remember correctly. It's so. However, its foreign ministry attributed the action to Moscow and said it would urgently summon the Russian ambassador. The Russian Defense Ministry has not commented on the strikes. Energo, Ukraine's energy operator, stated that several high-voltage sites around the country had been hit. Emergency shutdowns are being implemented to preempt possible damage to the power grid from overload. Railway operator Zelensky said the power cut had forced several trains to be Ukraine, while some electric locomotives with some electric locomotives being replaced by backup diesel engines. This is once again relying on power grid to sustain all these electric magical things. Allows for centralized power. And in the United States, I learned that if you destroy 6 substations in the United States, you can cut off power for about 18 months. This is what the U.S. government has recently told people. And Russia is calling these new strikes, I believe. Russia develops a heavy drone called Trump. So the Ukrainian security crisis has once confirmed the importance of unmanned aerial vehicles in modern military conflict, with Russia dramatically ramping up production and research in this field last spring and summer in response to shortcomings. Anyways, so they developed a new drone capable of delivering up to 250 kilograms of useful cargo distances up to 600 kilometers. A military industrial source has told Sputnik. The drone, known as the Transport Aviation Multifunctional Platform, or the Russian acronym T-SMAL RUMP, has a cruising speed. So it's just a troll. And Russia's happy with this because, despite what people think, Russia didn't really like troll. Russian commenters have said, thanks to this name, Donald Trump will be thrown under the bus in the U.S. and encourages sponsoring the creation of a drone named in his honor. And so the Russians didn't like Trump either. All this claim that Russia really liked Trump. No, Russia didn't like Trump. Russia was scared of Trump. Trump would bring John Bolton in the room and be like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna freaking go right to DEFCON 5. We're gonna go freaking all the way, or whatever. We're gonna go all the way. Nuclear war if you do this." I mean, John Bolton was a thing. Now Elon Musk, recently has said that he's going to stop supporting the Ukrainian military. You have the President Zelensky is lashing out after Elon Musk is cutting off the Ukrainian drones. These are drones that have been used in also U.S. targeting. All these drones allegedly. Many of these drones are targeted using U.S. military assets, U.S. spy plane, U.S. satellites and other positioning things. These are satellites that can count the hairs on a mustache from space, but these satellites apparently can't tell what flies into U.S. airspace. Like when yesterday the U.S. military said they shot down an unknown object over Alaska. And Elon Musk's SpaceX has blocked the Ukrainian government and its military from using Starlink technology to fly and control drones. After early in the war, SpaceX gifted thousands of Starlink dishes to Ukraine to help the population stay connected. Starlink President Glenn Shotwell said in a statement, asserted that Starlink technology was never meant to be weaponized. According to BBC, she made a reference to Ukraine's alleged use of Starlink to control drones and stressed that the equipment had provided for humanitarian use. And this is Elon Musk responding that he's damned if he do, damned if he don't on this. Shotwell confirmed that the surprise decision was taken due to it never being in the company's attempt to allow Starlink to be used for offensive purposes, in remarks given before a conference in Washington, D.C. Shotwell further said Ukraine had utilized the technology in ways that were unintentional and not part of any agreement, according to Reuters. After Musk provided the Starlink system, the Ukrainian military quickly began to depend on them, given the extreme battlefield conditions, including damage to existing communications infrastructure and frequent power outages. Additionally, the Russians would often jam signals, and Starlink allowed Ukrainian troops to circumvent those factors. The Wednesday announcement for Startback was met by anger in Kyiv, after already there's been an avalanche of Ukrainian government criticism aimed at Musk personally over his Russian-Ukrainian peace poll offered in December. As Bloomberg observed during that prior spat in tensions, Musk's tweets were drawing the wrath of Ukrainians merely for him proposing a negotiated peace solution which involved territorial concessions for the sake of lasting peace. Zelensky's office issued a denunciation on Thursday, complained that Musk's company has failed to understand or acknowledge Ukrainians' right to self-defense in making the decisions. Presidential spokesman Mikhailo Podolyak suggested Musk is playing into Putin's hands, stating that Pesos must be whether it's on the right side of to freedom or on the Russian Federation side in its right to kill and seize territories. It must remember that soon after last year's Russian invasion, Ukrainian officials essentially begged Musk to come to rescue. A direct plea by Ukraine's Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhailo Fedorov, at the time resulted in confirmation from Musk himself. Starlink is now active in Ukraine, Musk affirmed to apply. So that's that. And then we have the life expectancy on the Ukrainian front lines.
Ukrainian media reporter stating that, according to some reports, the life expectancy on Bakhmut front for fresh troops is about 4 hours.
Yes, and the Russian military. This is a video I had this earlier. This little clip here. I just can't find it. I found this easier. So we got that going on, and the Wall Street Journal has said that these tanks aren't arriving. I cannot. Okay, tanks are arriving in Ukraine despite promises from European allies, and we have Republicans in Congress. Which, the Senate Republicans, they're pro-war, but some of the Republicans are pushing to end Ukraine aid. This is $1.1 billion a day we're giving to Ukraine. We've already given them over $110 billion of U.S. aid. The rest of the world is giving them another $10 billion, so that gives them $120 billion in aid that Ukraine has already gotten. Well, we can't defend the borders of the United States because that's racist. We can go all out to kill the Russians because that's not racist. Meanwhile, we got the Russia's according to the New York Post, Russia's massing 500,000 soldiers, 1.8 thousand tanks to launch an offensive in 10 days. This is what an official says, and this is once again, Ukrainian officials and foreign analysts have been predicting for weeks that the Kremlin is gearing up for decisive push to cede the battlefield initiative from Kiev's forces, and the hope scores in a major victory in time for the February 24th first anniversary of the war. A Ukrainian military official speaking to Foreign Policy on condition of anonymity. This is the same kind of source that Symour Hersh used. We expect it in the next 10 days, a new huge invasion. And this is from February 9th. So this is 2 days ago. At the same time, because the U.S. It brilliantly wanted to put a cap on Russian oil that Russia doesn't want to sell to the United States, Russia is going to cut output by 500,000 barrels per day from current production levels. You know, So Russian Deputy Minister Alexander Novak told reporters earlier that Russian plans to conduct oil production voluntarily by 500,000 barrels per day in March. Today we're selling the entire volume of our oil output. But as we have said before, we're not going to sell oils to those who are directly or indirectly adhere to price cap principles. In this regard, Russia will voluntarily cut production of oil barrel by 500,000 per day in March. This will help restore market relations. So, which immediately following this, we had oil prices begin to rise throughout the world. You know, they like high oil prices. You know, this is really about, you know, they say it's about climate change. Well, they're destroying the climate with war. The biggest polluter in the world is the military-industrial complex, and they get a pass on all the environmental regulations. You know, and yet we have people, you know, they don't care about the people of their own countries. We have Britons facing permanent reduction in living standards. We got 7 million households in Great Britain are being affected because wages lag beyond double-digit inflation. Families struggle to pay their bills. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research has warned in the UK. According to a forecast by the UK's oldest independent economic research institute released Wednesday, 7 million households, with the equivalent of 1 in 4, will be unable to cover their energy and food bills once the government starts scaling back its subsidies program in April. Energy prices will remain high while inflation is running above 10%, more than 5 times the Bank of England's 2% target. We got France. You know, the trade deficit has doubled since in the last year. Since this foolish war that the U.S. has been promoting, and the Rand Corporation publicly stated in 2019 they wanted to overextend Russia. Now they're saying, well, maybe this isn't working as well as they want. Though many people still claim that Russia is on the verge of collapse, that Russia is going to collapse any day now, that the BRICS union is falling apart. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't see the evidence for their claims. We got real wages in Germany plummeting. So the loss of spending power last year was driven by soaring inflation. Official statistics show the real earnings in Germany decreased by an average of 4.1% in 2022 compared with a year earlier. I wonder why. You know, we got the Washington Post revealing, you know, one of the reasons why Starlink is being shut down is we have the Washington Post. They claim that the American military is controlling every shot with Pentagon-supplied rockets. A Ukrainian support official told the Washington Post. Once again, on an anonymous source from the Ukrainian military reported front page Washington Post, Ukrainian military requests precise coordinates from the Pentagon for almost every rocket followed from U.S.-made artillery systems and would not fire a shot without getting them, according to a report from the Washington Post. So I think I'll leave it at that. I should have something fun and happy to send people out. Let's see if I have a little. I think I have something. Well, all right. I guess I'll leave that. At that, I did have a funny video of people talking in Congress, but unfortunately, I think maybe it's my media thing. Let me see. Oh, so many stuff. Well, I don't see it here. Yeah. Let's see. I will. I'll leave you with this though.
Also need to fix the 3 problems with vaccines. The current vaccines are not infection blocking. They're not broad, so when new variants come up, you lose protection. And they have very short duration, particularly in the people who matter, which are old people. And every one of those things is fixable.
Oh, okay. So the vaccines don't work very well, but get them anyways. In any case, thank you all for watching to the very end. I appreciate the comments that people have made. I'm going to try and keep a better schedule so people aren't waiting too long. And I love you all. Remember to like, share, subscribe. You can just look for it's rumble.com/C/SheinSez if you want to tell people where. I'm also working on a website, and hopefully I'll have that up soon this week. In any case, I hope you have a good day and a better tomorrow. Try to be kind to each other, and I guess I'll just leave on that.